Now, do you feel like you've been running on the spot over the past few years or even going backwards? Well, according to the latest Household Income and Labour Dynamics Survey, HILDA for short, you're probably right. Living standards have stagnated since the 2008 financial crisis. The median household disposable income has dropped by $542 since 2009. But analysts say we're adjusting to living on less. Before the crisis, 73% of men worked full-time, but that dropped to 67% afterwards and has not fully recovered. Women in full-time work were also hit, but have since bounced back to the pre-crisis levels of just over 39%. Now, most households relied on some form of government welfare over a 10-year period. But since the survey began in 2001, total welfare dependency has dropped from 39 to 31%. But the number of depression and anxiety diagnoses is up across the board, with the most noticeable increase among younger Australians. And in a nod to anyone who battled their way to their job site or their desks this morning, commute times have blown out to an average of 4.5 hours a week, almost an hour more than the average commute in 2002.
It takes me about an hour and 50 minutes.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
That's one way.
Yeah, that's one way.
Does it bother you?
Yeah.
How does it affect you?
Makes me tired all the time.
Bus, train and then bus.
It's taking you 2 hours to get here this morning. Does that bother you?
Doesn't matter now because I got a full-time job here, so I can't get anything closer to my house and I don't want to leave my contract, so that's the main thing.
The lengthy commute. Now, there's so much in these statistics. On the day that the ASX is on a record high, but kind of mixed views across the population. So mixed results across the population, David. What does it tell us about modern-day Australia?
What it tells us is that we didn't really escape the GFC. You know how we've been so proud of the fact that we didn't go into recession, and that was a remarkable achievement. We didn't actually go into recession at the GFC, but we did cop it. And when you look at these figures, you see two Australias. You see the Australia before the GST and the Australia after. The Australia of growth, of dynamism, of wages going up. Everything was looking terrific. And it was a boom time. It was terrific. And then we just stood still. We haven't gone hugely backwards, but we just haven't grown. There's just been this plateau. Some figures have gone back. Poverty is on the increase, which is very disturbing. And obviously life is harder for a lot of people. And I think we've got to acknowledge much more candidly that Australia copped it with the GFC. And we've got to do more about dealing with that.
And Annika, also questions about kind of mobility across generations and income.
Yeah, I think when you talk to people in Canberra, you often hear that word aspiration during election cycles, and I guess it shows that it is quite a big thing to not only be aspirational but to make it there. There was one statistic that said about 1 in 10 people who start off in their teen years in the lowest quarter make it to the top quarter by the time they're 30. Now it might seem, or in their 30s, it might seem like a short period of time, but between that you're finishing school, you're going to university, you have opportunities, is what we get told. But that doesn't seem to be the case. And the other interesting thing I found was actually the split in female breadwinners. It has jumped a little bit higher, but men are less happy when their wives are earning more, which is just pretty disappointing.
But the same with the women. Did you notice the women weren't as happy either?
And the men aren't doing any more housework too. Right. Even if the women are earning more, they're doing just as much housework. So.
But the men are worrying more. The men are worrying more.
Not because they're doing more, not about doing housework.
No, but they're not doing anything about it. So the women are doing the work, but the men are worrying more, which I think is a good sign.
Worrying more when they have the long hours and the conflict between the...
Between not worrying about doing the vacuuming.
Right.
They're not doing anything.
And yet a lot of people today, Nicole's saying, look, there's positive things, the drop in the number of people on welfare and even the pension, but it's kind of not as clear-cut as that when you look across welfare generally. How do you view it?
Well, I was reading stuff around that people from disability support pensions are being pushed onto New Start, and there's a huge fear of somebody with complex medical conditions or can't meet the requirements of New Start. You know, we're marginalising further people who have already been marginalised, and how can we do this to the subset of community? And especially, Dylan Alcott has just released this new campaign around removing the barriers for people with a disability, and everybody's embracing that. But we're also then actively moving people over off the DSP onto Newstart, where the barriers to employment have just gotten tenfold. How is that possible? We're so excited to embrace this while actively do this and engage in this behaviour towards people, and that I find perplexing for myself, and for other people with disability. It's quite scary times ahead for us.
And has it impacted your family? Has it impacted?
Well, it's impacted
around
my
you?
family. I've got an older son that had to live on Newstart after being fired from a job because the boss just wasn't making enough money, and for 6 months he struggled to find work, and living on youth allowance wasn't enough to put petrol in his car to go and look for work and go to job interviews. I had to help him with things like mobile phone bills so that he can continue to have access to a phone for people to call him about job interviews. We're putting barriers in people's way that are the essential things that they need to actually get out of what it is that they've been put in. We talk about Australia having such a great safety net. That is not a great safety net. When somebody falls on hard times, we need to be there to catch them so that they don't fall too far, so they can get back on their feet and get back into the workforce. And the other thing is employment is not increasing in this country. It's actually going down with the more automation of different lower paid jobs and more people that just have no choice. I don't know personally too many people that are choosing to be unemployed. And the fact that this hasn't been raised in 25 years. And $75 extra a week is all people are calling for. That's not a huge amount of money to ask to provide to somebody to give them some respect and ability to maybe pull themselves out of this rut.
Tim, so we're more anxious, we're more depressed, we're commuting longer, we've got issues with welfare, wage stagnation. What do you see when you look at this snapshot of a nation?
Well, there's a lot in it. Obviously, there's
Of course.
There's the social, the economic, the demographic, the geographic. There is a lot in it. I wanted to try to paint perhaps a slightly more positive picture. There is unquestionably a range of areas in which we can and must do better as a nation, as a society, in economic terms, in human terms. But the Australian story, including post-GFC, recognising that growth did come off considerably, but the Australian story is essentially one of a big middle class, which is one of the greatest assets we have as a nation and as a society. Stability and a steadiness post GFC, low inflation, low unemployment, a strong safety net that isn't perfect, but as a nation, we are a real success story, and it's easy to, I think, take that for granted.
You taking it for granted, David?
Well, I think one of the really important political instincts of this country, and it was on display in the last election, is a kind of general feeling that we are getting more and more prosperous, that we're just naturally becoming more prosperous, and that this means we don't have to make a lot of hard decisions along the way. We don't have to make hard equity decisions. We don't have to make hard cuts to people. We can let people who are already wealthy get free handouts to top up their income from their shares. All of that's possible because we're just getting more and more prosperous. And these figures are further suggestion that that kind of animating political instinct in this country is going to turn. And when it turns, our politics are going to be very different, because there is going to be more competition for a pie which we are no longer absolutely confident will just grow forever. And that's going to change our politics. And it's particularly going to change the politics of conservative Australia, I think. It will take time, but these HILDA results, and isn't the name just bliss, HILDA, these HILDA results are just these beautiful, detailed figures of this, 14 or 15,000 people who've been followed, their lives have been followed now for 17
2001,
years,
yep.
and it's not a fresh sample every time. It's the same people, and we know in such detail the way these lives
20,000
lives are being lived, and it is not really according to this old Australian dream, and that's going to change things.